What is going on, guys? Will Dalval here, back with another episode of the As We Go podcast. This past Sunday in church, our lead pastor went over the parable of the prodigal son. It's one of my favorite stories, and I'll explain why maybe throughout the episode. But I can still remember when I was still in Catholic church and being in CCD as a middle schooler. And I remember one day, one of the nuns in the CCD put on like Jesus the animated series. And it was like just Jesus the cartoon version. And I always loved those days because we weren't learning about the sacraments. We weren't learning about these crazy Catholic things. We were just learning about who Jesus is in movie form. And I love movies. As a kid, I loved cartoons. So, I mean, of course, I was so excited for Jesus the animated series or whatever it was called. But anytime anyone preaches or I hear a sermon or I hear any commentary on the prodigal son, I always think about the animated version. So when I'm hearing it and I'm playing the scenes out in my head, I'm usually picturing that video from CCD. But I've love this story because it's about, in the NLT version, it's called the parable of the lost son. And even on Sunday, our pastor talked about a little bit how like you can kind of call it the parable of the lost sons because there's two brothers involved in this story. But every time I hear it, I just think of those around me. How many of us have kind of grown up in the church? And when I say grown up in the church, I mean, I didn't grow up in church per se from like a young age. Like I said, maybe before I grew up Catholic. I started going to Catholic when I was probably, a Catholic church when I was in preschool, and I went all the way up until 8th grade. But in between there and at middle school, I started going to this, Protestant church, not to get too bogged down with titles and names and genres of churches and denominations. I'm not really about that. But all that to say was, when I hear these, we all grow up with this spirituality, it seems like. As a very generalized terms, but here in America, kind of everyone's heard about Christianity, everyone's heard about Jesus, and many people, at least in my vicinity or my worldview, has some interaction with the church. Now that I'm older and have a bigger framework of people and friend groups, yeah, I know people who've never been inside a church or anything like that. But growing up, most people went to church or had some interaction with it. And then now that I'm in youth ministry, a lot of my worldview, a lot of the people around me obviously attend church. And the reason this parable means so much to me is because many people lose their way. A crazy statistic that's out there, I was just talking about this with someone this week, and I got to check the stats, but it was done by the Barna Group a long time ago, and I don't think the stat has changed. But it says that 2 out of 3 students who attend youth group in their teenage years, when they eventually graduate out of that youth program or out of the youth group or they graduate high school, 2 out of 3 don't return to the church, right? They're kind of like, hey, I'm done with faith, and they kind of go their own way. And as a youth pastor, it's always so sad. It's so heartbreaking. And you see these like self-fulfilling prophecies where students will say, oh, I'm just so worried about when I go to college, I might lose my faith. And I'm like, you don't have to lose it. It can go with you everywhere. But then they get involved in just different avenues and different things. And then all of a sudden, faith becomes the back burner. But I think that's a learned behavior. So many people that I talk to in my space, in my worldview, were involved in the church and they found themselves in a community, and then all of a sudden they're not in that community anymore. And something happens in the meantime between, hey, I was in the church or I was in community, and then now I'm kind of doing my own thing. We get to this spot where you start to think, maybe I've done too much wrong to ever go back. Even in high school, I remember having a conversation with someone in the lunchroom, and she said, Will, I want to go to church. And this was when I first became a believer. I was telling everyone about Jesus, everybody I knew. I was like that weird, like annoying kid who would I tell this story all the time. On the bus, I always had a pocket Bible, and I'd pop up and turn to the person behind me and go, do you know Jesus? I was just so excited about this faith that I found, so excited that I felt found, that I felt hope again, because I went through some hard times in life. But I remember talking to this girl one time in the lunchroom, and I was inviting her to youth group. And she came a few times. And I remember one time we were talking, and she goes, Will, I think I'm too messed up for God to love. I'm like, what? No way. And she goes, yeah, I think I've sinned too much. Fast forward to when I'm running my own youth group. I was running a youth group in Pleasantville, New Jersey, so right outside Atlantic City, New Jersey, so a more urban ministry. I remember one girl was sitting in our youth group. She raised her hand, and we were talking about baptism one day, and she goes, Will, I want to get baptized and put my faith in Jesus, but I've messed up too much for him to love me. I'd have to really clean up my life before he'd ever accept me. And just as you keep fast forwarding the story of my life and these interactions, more and more people say that I just messed up too much, or God can never accept me, or he can't accept the things I've done wrong, or I've messed up way too much, and there's no way that even Jesus could cover this amount of sin. And that's why I like this story, because I feel like it gives so much hope. So I want to read this passage. It's found in Luke 15. It's called the Parable of the Lost Son. Now, when you look at titles in Scripture, that's not there by the original authors. That's there by the translators. But the translators, they called it the Parable of the Lost Son, arguably the Parable of the Lost Sons. But let's look at it. I'm going to kind of commentate on it, and then we'll see where God takes us. So in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, it says this, and this is Jesus talking. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons, and the younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So I need you to understand the severity and the depth and the weight of that sentence, right? There's a man with 2 sons, and this younger son goes to his dad and says, hey, I want my share of your estate. Basically he's saying, I want my inheritance now. Think about the weight of that. He's not just saying, I want some money. He's like, man, you have an inheritance, and usually you get your inheritance after someone has passed. He's like, I want that inheritance now, right? So basically, imagine being a dad and hearing your son saying, hey, can I just have the money that I get when you die? Can I have that now? He's basically saying, hey, you're better off dead to me. You're worth more to me dead than alive. I kind of wish you were dead so I could have the money. But hey, we can kind of meet in the middle. How about you just give me the money now? I think any dad would be like, no, I'm not giving you the money. What are you, crazy? Go back to your room. Or like, hey, now you're going to work double the amount of chores. Why are you asking me such a weird question? But this is what the man does. A man had 2 sons, verse 12. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between the 2 sons. So the dad actually listens, he obliges, and he gives this younger son, the share of his estate. Verse 13, a few days later, the younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. Right away, he got the money, and he's like, peace, see ya. He gets this inheritance and he packs up all his stuff, and only a few days later, he's out. How did he come up with this plan? I mean, it wasn't like he had much thought. He just goes to his dad saying, hey, I want my share of the inheritance. And when his dad gets to him, it's like, whoa, you gave me the money? I'm out of here. That shows the relationship between this son and this father. So in that verse 13, a few days later, the younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. This kid wanted out. He wanted out of this family, and he went as far as he could with as much money as he can, and he wasted all of it on wild living. So I'm pretty sure that we can all imagine what wild living is. This kid just blows through the money and he is done. He wastes all of it. Verse 14, about this time, his money ran out, and a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. See, this son goes to his dad, and he's like, hey, give me what's owed to me. Give me what I deserve. And then he takes what he believes he deserves, and he just dips, and he just goes, and he starts to live his life his own way. He started to live his way, the way he wanted to live, the way he thought was best. And he goes to this far off land and just wastes all that potential money. He just wastes all the things that he was given so quickly. See, I mean, it's so funny because he just basically is saying, Dad, I don't want you. I want your stuff. And I want to do with your stuff what I want. How many times do we do that with God? Where we know, maybe we have this belief in God and we know that God gives blessings upon blessings and God loves us and he cares for us. And we want all, think about it. Just examine, let me put this challenge before you. Examine your prayer life. When you pray and you catalog and you think about all the stuff you prayed for, is it more about stuff and wishes and things that you think you deserve? Think about it. I heard a pastor say this one time. What if you got today everything you thanked God for yesterday? How much would you have? And man, that convicted me. I'm like, oh, I didn't thank God for much, but I asked him for a lot. See, sometimes I think we can fall into this trap of where we want the stuff, the treasure, the reward, the resources God can give rather than God. Believers can fall into this trap too, right? We can fall into this consumeristic faith. We just want the blessings of God. We want God to provide the house. We want God to provide the car. We want God to provide the way to the schooling and provide the relationships and provide that boyfriend or girlfriend. And it's like, how many times we're saying, I just need that husband or I just need a wife. And we're asking God for all the stuff. And we're saying, God, I want the stuff you give me, not necessarily the relationship. Because how many times do we get the stuff and then all those prayers that we were praying so desperately for fall to the wayside? And we're back to just focusing on ourselves. See, this is what is happening to this son. He's saying, Dad, I want your stuff, not you. And then he just squanders it. He wastes it. Whoa, breaking the fourth wall and jumping into my own episode. I'm here to tell you that the As We Go podcast has started a Patreon. We want to continue to grow this content and get the message out there. We want to up our quality and start having interviews and more dialogue with each other. To do that, we need some support. So will you consider giving to our Patreon? You can find it wherever links are. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any content. And now let's get back into the episode. Verse 15. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. Now what you got to remember is Jesus is in a Jewish culture. Jesus was Jewish, and he's talking to the Jewish people. And he's talking about how this young man in the story had to go work on a pig farm. Now, if you know anything about Judaism, pigs were unclean. They couldn't deal with pigs. They couldn't touch them. They couldn't eat them. It was unclean. So what Jesus is saying is not only did this man lose all his money, he hit rock bottom. For them, you could not hit lower. You're you're tending to the pigs on a pig farm. You've wasted everything. Your life amounted to nothing. Verse 16, the young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. Talk about rock bottom. The thing that you can't even touch, the animal that you are unclean even being in the presence of, their food looks great for you. And they won't even give you that. He's lost everything. You want to talk about sinning or messing up too much? He ruined it. There's nowhere left to go. He hit rock bottom. Watch this, verse 17. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, back at his father's house, at home, even the hired servants had food enough to spare. And here I am, dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you. Verse 19, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me as your hired servant. So he has this realization. He's like, man, I'm sitting here on this pig farm and what the pigs are eating, man, that even looks good. And I'm sitting here going like, what have I done? Even the hired servants that lived in my father's house ate better than me and they had leftovers and I got nothing. And he comes up with a plan. I got to go back home. And he starts practicing what he's going to say. He's like, hey, Dad, I'm sorry. I sinned both against heaven and you. And I'm no longer your son. You don't even have to call me your son, but would you even consider hiring me as a servant? Verse 20. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I've sinned both against heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to his servants, quick, bring the finest robes in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf that we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And so the party began. So I love this picture here. The father is still at home and the son is far off and he's walking back and he's just probably thinking like, man, okay, Father, I've sinned against you in heaven. Will you hire me as your servant? And he's just, Father, I've sinned against you in heaven. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Would you just accept me as your servant? And then his dad sees him, and his dad in all these robes, and he pulls him up to his knees and he starts booking it to the son, and he hugs the son, and the son does it. Now this is the moment. I gotta prepare this speech. Father, I've sinned against you and heaven, and I'm not worthy of being called your son. And the dad's like, boy, stop it. You were dead, and now you're alive. You were lost, but now you're found. I love you. And he kisses him. He puts a ring on his finger. He says, yo, let's go have barbecue. Let's have a party. I'm just so happy you're back. I mean, do you see why I love this story? So many people today feel like, yeah, maybe I had a faith when I was a kid, or maybe I had a faith all those years ago, or I had a faith when I was in youth group, but now I've done way too much. I've hit my rock bottom. I'm lost in this world. God could never accept me. Why do you think Jesus tells this story? Why he gives the Father such compassion and love and says that he runs to the Son. There's nowhere in Scripture you see God running. And we like to think that God is sitting on this throne just judging us, and that's it. But no, he said this Father, this picture of God that Jesus gives us, says he's a Father who runs towards us and is just happy to have found us. He didn't even let him finish his speech. He just said, I'm just so happy you're back. Filled with compassion and mercy. That's God. And so he throws him a party. What you need to know is, no matter where you are in life, you can always go back home to God. That he's never giving up on you, but like a father looking out at the distance, waiting for his son to return, is how God feels about you. That he loves you and cares for you. And even if you've walked away, even if you are in this life and you feel like I've done way too much, there's no way all that I have surmounted, all this sin, all this bad that I've created, God could ever carry. He goes, throw that down. Embraces you and says, you were dead, but you're alive now because you're back with me. That's God. That's his grace and his mercy. He wasn't sitting here bringing up, now let's go over all the bad you did. He said, I'm just so happy you are home. And throws him a party. You are never too far off for the love of God. You've never sinned too much that God doesn't want to embrace you and welcome you back into the family, because his son Jesus, the one who was never lost, died in your place so that you can feel the embrace of a loving Father. But it's interesting that God compares himself and addresses himself as a father, because a lot of us have baggage with our fathers. See, growing up, my dad is extremely kind and he's extremely loving and he cares about me deeply and he's very emotional about me. He's always telling me how proud he is. So when I picture God and I picture God as Father, I just get it. I understand his unconditional love. But not everyone has the same story. Some people have not felt the love of the Father. Let me tell you this. God is the best of all of our fathers with none of the worst. Some people, when they think that word father, years ago, we did this thing. We had a whiteboard out in youth group years ago when I was working in Pleasantville, and we put on a whiteboard, father, and I had the students say, like, what do they think that word means? Like, what words do they equate with it? And people wrote, like, dad. Some people wrote works a lot. Some people wrote in prison. Some wrote deadbeat. Some wrote non-existent. Too many wrote negative things. God is none of those negatives, but he's all of the positives. And I love in this story that he's referred to as Father, because some of you have been really hurt by your father. And this heavenly Father wants to embrace you. Now, the story doesn't end there. Let me finish it out because remember, there's 2 sons. Verse 25, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. He said, your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fatted calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. In verse 28, the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. And his father came out and begged him. But he replied, all these years I slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you've told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf. See, the older brother, he's like, I've been here. I've listened. And that other one, he didn't even refer to him as his brother. He says, your other son spent all your money on prostitutes, all your money on women and wild living, whatever that is. He's not worthy of a party. I don't care that he's back. He's done way too much. Sometimes the church can do that. That we, or people, believers, can somehow get on some high horse going like, man, but I've done everything right. We shouldn't let people in. They have sinned too much. They have done too much. But that's not how God is. This is what the father finishes in verse 31. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now is found. See, we as the church, we as believers, if you put your faith in Jesus, we need to be looking for the lost, because what did Jesus come to do? He came to seek and save the lost. We don't need to be on a high horse. I'm not comparing myself to others going like, oh, well, I'm worthy of God and they're not. No, we are all undeserving of his love, and he's willing to give it to all of us. No matter gender, race, creed, he wants all of us. He loves you. The answer about God, when it comes to you and your sin, hey, you may have sin in high school. He loves you anyway. You may be wrestling with your sexuality. He loves you anyway. You may have, stolen money. He loves you anyway. You may have committed that worst sin that you could ever think of. You know what the answer is? He loves you anyway. But I slept around. He loves you anyway. But I've cheated. He loves you anyway. I've done drugs. He loves you anyway. I've stolen. He loves you anyway. I've rejected him for so long. He loves you anyway. Our job is not to judge each other and say like, oh, you're undeserving of God's love. It's to tell you that even though we were undeserving, he loved us anyway. That we can be lost. All of us at some point have been lost, but we can be found. Let me tell you today, no matter how far, how bad you think you've been, and how lost you feel like you are, you can always run to God. And let me tell you, he's running towards you, and his love is truly unconditional. That's why he sent Jesus. So maybe you relate to the older or the younger brother, and you're like, I messed up way too much. I used to be in youth group, and now I'm way too far gone. He loves you and wants to embrace you and welcome you back home. And maybe you're like the other brother, like, man, I've been here the whole time. I don't want them. We got to humble ourselves and realize, man, we've all fallen short of God's glory. None of us deserve his embrace and love, but he gives it to us anyway. And maybe you've never put your faith in Jesus. You didn't walk away from church or a community of faith. You never were in one. God is standing there with arms wide open, waiting to embrace you too. You just have to put your faith in him. You don't have to be a lost son. You can put your faith in his one and only son, and he's going to welcome you into his home. Today, may you put your faith in the Son of the living God. You no longer need to be lost. You can be found today. And if you've been found and you know the love of the Father, tell others about it. Let's join in Jesus' mission to seek and save the lost. Until next time.